NASA's Artemis II rocket has rolled out to a launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center, ready to launch astronauts around the moon as early as Feb 6. The towering rocket is so large, an astronaut aboard the International Space Station was able to capture the rollout event. Joining me now is ANU astrophysicist and cosmologist Dr. Brad Tucker. So this is what interests me. They're going up and they're going around the moon quite a few times. They're not going on it. Will future missions, because I know it's all about readiness, definitely have astronauts back on the moon, or is that in some doubt?
No. This is kind of all part of the plan of building up the framework, to getting him on the surface. If you go back to the Apollo missions, it wasn't until Apollo 11, landed actually on the surface. And so the lessons learned from there, they kind of know, all right, what aspects work, what techniques work, what calculations do we need to test or equipment, and how can we combine some of those? So kind of Apollo or Artemis II, it's kind of a combination of like Apollos 8, 9, and 10, where they tested a variety of those systems. And so the Artemis III, the next one after this, should be ideally a year-ish or so after, probably 2028 sometime. And that would actually be landing people back on the surface, getting towards that full return to the moon.
Okay. So it's going to take a while, but this is a concrete step, I suppose. Now, I know we've said before you're very concerned about space junk, and so will the Chinese be now, because they've had a pretty big interruption to one of their missions because of space junk.
Yeah, so, earlier last year, we were talking about one of the capsules that was damaged by space junk, the Shenzhou 20. And so they had to launch this whole reconfigured mission to get a capsule up, get it there empty, so that then the astronauts had a ride home. So we just had the return, as you're seeing kind of on your screen, of the Shenzhou 20 empty. So this was the damaged capsule returning back to the Earth without people. And so they wanted to assess the scale of damage, how potential at risk was the capsule. Obviously, ideally fix the capsule because they try and reuse these, and learn the design. The fact that this was punctured by space junk and damage and determined inoperable or unsafe, for at least for human spaceflight, will hopefully allow them to design potentially a little bit better, maybe mechanisms or structures to do this, or at least in sensor-wise, what is at risk or not. So the capsule that you were seeing, in fact, there was part of the hole was covered, one of the portholes was covered, because that was actually the damaged part. So this hopefully will inform the Chinese space program onto those risks and designs of space junk. Because as you said, it is definitely at risk when we talk about people up there.
Are there nations better and worse at worrying about space junk? When you said you hope it informs them, was that a little hint there?
No. So I think that the genuine thing is we've been lucky that we haven't had a lot of these incidences happen. So there's a little bit of lessons learned for, I guess, the entire community. China's just the first to really experience it. But also some of those operational things. China, this was the first time they had to send a quote-unquote rescue mission. They had to do a reconfiguration. NASA's done this now a few times, even just those astronauts that came down last week because of illness. But the U.S. has dealt with tragedy. Today's the day of remembrance for NASA, where they remember the crews of the Apollo 1, but also Challenger and Columbia, where the astronauts lost their lives. NASA has had to experience the whole reinvestigation, design, processing, and issues associated with potential damage and space flight risk. China hasn't had to do that yet, so that's part of their improvement in their space program.
Final story, I'm going to need you to translate this one a bit for me. I'm going to really dumb it down, but basically we're looking off into the distance at some relatively young planets. They're only 20 million years of age, so a lot younger than Earth, however many billions of years Earth is. And they're very light. So scientists are calling these planets, they're getting bigger and lighter. They're sort of calling them styrofoam. So what does this mean for our understanding? Do planets get lighter and then heavier, or is this some planets get denser and some get lighter? Is this something different to our previous understanding?
Yeah, so this is kind of this transition phase, right? If you look at our solar system, we have 4 small dense planets in the Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. You then look at Jupiter and Saturn, which are really large size-wise, not nearly as dense. In fact, there's always analogies where Saturn can float in water. And then you get Uranus and Neptune, which are even different further. And there are actually some even more extreme planets that are almost like cotton candy. So the question is always, how do these planets kind of, where is the transition? How do they form? Are you going to be a small, dense planet, or are you going to really puff out? And we've never seen the stage, 20 million years is actually quite young. This is really in the beginnings and that kind of toddler phase of planets. They're born, but they're starting to grow and develop. How do they transition between the Earth-like planets that become solid and rocky and those big gas giants that we see today and even puff out? So seeing where maybe, how close to your star they are, how much mass you need to do this, these are all keys which may determine Earth-like or Jupiter-like. And then when we talk about the possibility of obviously life, that's always these questions we go through, those rocky planets where we know life exists. How and what are the conditions for giving them rise? We need to understand this growing up and transition phase of planets.
Okay, my silly question of the day is this. The so-called gas giants, if a meteor comes through, can it just pass through and make a little hole in it and the gas closes the hole up again? How does that work?
No, so great question. We actually saw this in 1994. There was a comet that hit Jupiter. It was called Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9. And this was actually tested, this theory. And what we realize is the gas planets, they're not complete. Well, they are gas, but they become so dense, it's almost like hitting a solid surface. So when Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 crashed into Jupiter back in 94, it actually left an explosion and then a hole. But that hole then filled up with the gas. So it really started to test this theory of how dense they are. How do these gas giants and planets, how do these behaviors work? And then what's going on underneath the surface? And you get to this point again of so dense places that you can't even move through, or objects are essentially crushed with the pressure and gravity. So we've seen that in reality now.
All right, so someone else had the silly question many years ago. I feel better already. Brad Tucker, thank you. We'll talk again soon.